The afternoon sky over Oakwood hung heavy with dull gray light. On the front steps of the Collins residence, little Sophie Morgan, only 7 years old, collapsed to her knees. Her small hands clutched her head as icy water poured down from the garden hose her aunt held mercilessly. Her thin dress clung to her frail body, and her old teddy bear lay face down on the wet concrete, soaked and forgotten. "Get out of my house this instant!" Diane Collins shrieked, her voice sharp as broken glass. Her face was painted as though she were leaving for a party, not returning from her brother's funeral. "You bring nothing but bad luck. From the moment you were born, this family has known no peace." Behind her stood Gregory Collins, arms folded, a mocking smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The kid's been spoiled her whole life. Now her parents are gone. She thinks everyone should pity her. Another mouth to feed will only drag us down. Sophie's lips trembled. She pressed her palms together, her voice breaking between sobs. "Aunt Diane, Uncle Gregory, please don't make me leave. I'll be good. I'll do the chores. I won't bother anyone. Please, I have nowhere else to go." Diane bent down, her eyes burning with cruelty. "If it weren't for you, your father wouldn't have run into that fire. If it weren't for you, your mother would still be alive. You carry nothing but misfortune. This house has no place for you." The words cut deeper than any lash of the hose. Sophie clung to her teddy bear, her small body shivering violently. From across the street, a few neighbors gathered behind the fence. They whispered, shaking their heads. "Poor child. But what can we do? It's their family business." No one dared to step forward. Diane twisted the valve tighter, the stream of water striking Sophie's hair and shoulders until she could barely breathe. Her thin frame crumpled further, her knees scraping against the wet pavement. Her sobs echoed through the yard, mingling with the hiss of the water. Just then, a deep, commanding sound shattered the cruel scene, the roar of an engine at the front gate. Heads turned as a sleek black Bentley Continental rolled to a stop, its polished surface gleaming under the fading sun. The neighbors fell silent. Even Diane lowered the hose, her painted smile faltering. The car door opened and Dr. Alexander Reynolds stepped out. At 55, he was known throughout Pennsylvania as a brilliant heart surgeon, hospital director, and a man of considerable wealth. His name carried weight in every medical circle. But in Oakwood, people spoke of him in hushed tones, the millionaire doctor who lived alone in a vast, empty mansion. His polished shoes struck the pavement with steady, purposeful steps as he entered the yard. His sharp gaze swept across the scene. The sobbing child drenched in water, the aunt holding the hose, the uncle sneering behind her. The air seemed to tighten around him. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but thunderous enough to pierce every ear. "Is this how you treat your own family? Thomas has barely been laid to rest, and you disgrace his memory like this." At the sound of her father's name, Sophie lifted her tear-streaked face. For the first time that day, a flicker of astonishment lit her wide eyes. Diane's lips twitched, but she quickly forced a brittle smile. "Dr. Reynolds, you misunderstand. We were only trying to teach the girl a lesson. She's stubborn. If we're not strict, she'll grow up impossible to handle." Dr. Reynolds' gaze did not soften. His eyes lingered on the hose still clutched in Diane's hand. "Teaching," he said, each word deliberate, heavy. "This is not discipline. This is cruelty." Gregory stepped forward, trying to sound bold, though his voice cracked. "She's our niece. We can raise her however we want. You have no right to interfere." In an instant, Dr. Reynolds closed the distance. His movement was swift, decisive. With a sharp flick of his arm, he knocked Gregory's hand away as the man reached for Sophie. Gregory stumbled back, stunned. Without another word, Dr. Reynolds bent down and lifted Sophie into his arms. She was trembling, dripping wet, clutching her teddy bear with what little strength she had left. For the first time since the fire, Sophie felt arms around her that did not push her away. Arms that held her instead of hurting her. And yet, as she buried her face against his shoulder, one desperate thought pierced her small, frightened heart. Would this man abandon her too, just like everyone else? The drive to Dr. Alexander Reynolds' estate was silent, except for the hum of the car's engine. Sophie sat stiffly in the leather seat, her teddy bear pressed tight against her chest. Water still dripped from her hair, leaving dark stains on the seat, but she didn't dare move. She kept her eyes on the window, watching the trees and houses slide by, each one more unfamiliar than the last. When the car slowed and finally stopped, Sophie blinked. Before her rose a sprawling mansion of gleaming glass and stone, its long veranda stretching like open arms. Warm lights shone behind tall windows, but the air felt colder than the autumn wind outside. She hesitated at the gates, clutching her teddy bear, as though it were the only anchor left in her world. Dr. Reynolds stepped out first, his movements composed, his face unreadable. He opened the door for her and waited, not rushing her. His tall frame loomed against the glow of the porch lights. "Come inside," he said quietly. Sophie's feet felt glued to the ground. At last, she followed him into the foyer. The mansion's polished wooden floors gleamed, and chandeliers hung like frozen rain from the high ceilings. To a child who had lived in an ordinary family home, the sight was overwhelming. The house seemed too big, too spotless, more like a museum than a place where people lived. A woman in a neat uniform appeared from the hallway. She was in her 60s, her silver hair pulled back in a bun. "Dr. Reynolds, you're back early," she said briskly. Then her eyes softened as they fell on Sophie. "Eleanor," he said, "please prepare the blue room for our guest." He knelt down to Sophie's level, his voice gentler now. "This is Mrs. Eleanor Wilson. She takes care of this house, and if you'd like, she'll help take care of you too." Eleanor's kind eyes crinkled at the corners. "You poor dear. Let's get you warmed up." She extended her hand, weathered but soft. Sophie hesitated, then placed her small, cold hand in Eleanor's. The older woman led her upstairs to a bathroom where steam rose from a filling tub. Next to it, a set of clean clothes lay folded far too large, but better than her soaked dress. "These were from Dr. Reynolds' goddaughter when she visited last summer," Eleanor explained. "They'll be big, but they'll do for tonight. Tomorrow we'll find something better." As Sophie soaked in the warm water, she heard hushed voices downstairs. Dr. Reynolds speaking firmly on the phone. Words like custody and temporary guardianship floated up the staircase. She didn't understand them all, but she recognized the tone, the same decisive authority that had faced down her aunt and uncle. Clean and dressed in the oversized clothes, Sophie followed Eleanor to the blue room. It was vast compared to her old bedroom, with a four-poster bed that seemed to float like a ship in an ocean of carpet. The walls were painted a soft blue like the sky on a clear day. Nothing like the night that had taken her parents. Eleanor tucked her in the blankets, forming a cocoon of warmth around her tired body. "Dr. Reynolds will check on you soon. Try to rest, dear one." Left alone, Sophie clutched her damp teddy bear, now partially dried by Eleanor's careful attention with a hairdryer. The mansion was quiet, so different from the chaos of the past week, the fire, the funeral, the hoses' cruel spray. Her eyelids grew heavy, the exhaustion of grief pulling her towards sleep. She was drifting when a soft knock came at the door. Dr. Reynolds entered, carrying a tray with hot chocolate and small cookies. His tall figure seemed less imposing now, his shoulders slightly stooped as if carrying an invisible weight. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, placing the tray on the bedside table. Sophie sat up slowly, eyeing the steaming mug. She hadn't eaten since morning, the knots in her stomach too tight for food at her aunt's house. Cautiously, she took the mug, its warmth seeping into her cold fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice small in the vast room. Dr. Reynolds sat in the chair beside the bed, his movements careful as if afraid to startle her. "Sophie, I know today has been difficult, but I want you to know that you're safe here. No one will hurt you in this house." Sophie took a small sip of chocolate, the rich sweetness coating her tongue. "Will I have to go back tomorrow?" The question hung in the air between them. Dr. Reynolds' jaw tightened, a flicker of something fierce crossing his face. "No, not tomorrow, not ever if I can help it." Sophie nodded, not quite believing, but wanting to. Adults made promises. Her parents had promised to always be there too. As if reading her thoughts, Dr. Reynolds leaned forward, his voice low and measured. "Sophie, there's something you should know. I knew your father. We were friends, good friends for many years." Her head snapped up, chocolate forgotten. "You knew my daddy." A sad smile touched his lips. "Yes, Thomas and I met in medical school. He saved my life once. Did you know that? We were hiking and I slipped on a ridge. He caught me before I fell. That was your father, always reaching out to save others." Sophie's eyes widened, drinking in this new information about her father. No one had told her stories about him since the fire. At Aunt Diane's mentioning her parents had been forbidden. "Is that why you came today? Because you knew my daddy?" Dr. Reynolds' gaze drifted to the window where darkness had fully settled. "Partly. I made a promise to your father long ago that if anything ever happened to him and your mother, I would make sure you were safe." He looked back at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner." Something warm unfurled in Sophie's chest, different from the hot chocolate. A memory tugged at her mind, her father mentioning a friend named Alex, who had saved countless lives as a doctor. Could it be the same person? "My daddy talked about you," she whispered. "He said you had magic hands that fixed broken hearts." Dr. Reynolds' composure cracked just for a moment. He cleared his throat. I fix physical hearts, yes. But your father, he knew how to heal the other kind. The kind that breaks when we lose someone we love. Sophie nodded solemnly, understanding far too well for her 7 years. Her own heart felt splintered into 1,000 pieces. Will my heart ever get fixed? She asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Reynolds reached out, hesitated, then gently covered her small hand with his. It will never be exactly the same. But with time, with care, hearts can grow strong again, even around the broken places. I promise you that. Sophie finished her chocolate in silence, the warmth spreading through her body. Her eyelids grew heavy once more. Sleep now, Dr. Reynolds said, taking the empty mug. Tomorrow's a new day. As he reached the door, Sophie's drowsy voice stopped him. Dr. Reynolds, thank you for taking me away from there. He turned backlit by the hallway light. You can call me Alexander if you like, Sophie. Good night, Alexander, she murmured, already drifting towards sleep. Good night, Sophie. He closed the door softly, but instead of footsteps retreating down the hall, Sophie heard him settle into a chair outside her room. The realization that he was standing guard, keeping watch through the night, followed her into her dreams. But the dreams weren't kind. Fire engulfed her, smoke choking her lungs. Her father's voice called out desperate. Her mother screamed. Sophie jolted awake, a cry tearing from her throat, her small body drenched in sweat. The door flew open. Alexander rushed in, alarm etched on his face. Sophie, it's all right. You're safe. Tears streamed down her cheeks as the nightmare clung to her. They were burning. Daddy was trying to reach Mommy, but the ceiling fell. He pushed me out the window first. He promised he'd follow with Mommy, but... Her words dissolved into sobs. Alexander sat on the edge of the bed, hesitant, then gathered her into his arms. He held her as she cried, her tears soaking his shirt. I know, he whispered against her hair. I know. When her sobs quieted to hiccups, he reached for a framed photograph on the bedside table, one Eleanor must have placed there earlier. Look, Sophie, this is from a long time ago. In the picture, two young men stood grinning on a mountain summit, arms thrown around each other's shoulders. One was clearly a younger Alexander. The other, Daddy, Sophie gasped, tracing her finger over her father's face. Yes, this was after he saved me on that mountain. We were 25. Alexander's voice was thick with memory. He was my best friend, the brother I never had. Sophie studied the photograph, hunger for connection blazing in her eyes. You both look so happy. We were. Your father lived fully, Sophie. He packed more life into his years than most people do in a lifetime. Alexander's gaze turned distant. After my wife Catherine died 8 years ago, your father was the one who pulled me back from darkness. He refused to let me disappear into grief. Sophie absorbed this new information, fitting it into the puzzle of her life of Alexander's. Your wife died too. Alexander nodded, his expression softening with old sorrow. Yes, cancer. We had no children. After she was gone, your parents became my family. When you were born, your father asked me to be your godfather. What's a godfather? Someone who promises to watch over a child, to be there if they're needed. His voice caught. I should have been there sooner, Sophie. When I heard him about the firm, I was overseas at a medical conference. By the time I returned, the funeral had happened, and you'd been taken by your aunt and uncle. It took me days to track you down. Sophie processed this, her young mind grappling with the complexities of adult decisions and timing. But you found me. Yes. Something fierce flashed in his eyes. And I won't lose you again. They sat in silence for a moment, the bond between them shifting, strengthening. Sophie's eyelids began to droop once more, the emotional exhaustion claiming her. Alexander eased her back against the pillows, drawing the blankets up. Sleep if you can. I'll stay right here. True to his word, he settled into the armchair beside her bed. Sophie drifted off to the sound of his steady breathing, her hands still clutching the photograph. Downstairs, as dawn broke, Eleanor moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing coffee. She paused when she heard Alexander's voice, low and intense, coming from his study. Curiosity drew her closer. I found her just as he said I would, Alexander was saying into his phone. You should have seen what they were doing to her, James. Spraying her with a garden hose in October right after the funeral. His voice trembled with controlled rage. I'm going to protect his daughter with everything I have. Eleanor's breath caught. In 15 years of service to Alexander Reynolds, she had never heard such ferocity in his voice. As she turned to leave, a flash of paper on his desk caught her eye, a hastily scribbled note with the words, if anything happens to me, suspect RNA. Puzzled, she continued to the kitchen. unaware that Sophie had crept downstairs and stood frozen in the hallway, having heard everything. The little girl retreated silently to her room, the initials RNA burning in her mind. Rebecca and Andrew, her aunt and uncle. The next morning brought weak autumn sunshine streaming through the windows. Sophie emerged from her room to find fresh clothes laid out, still a bit large but closer to her size. Eleanor explained that Alexander had sent his driver to a store at first light to purchase essentials. Dressed and with her hair neatly combed, Sophie ventured downstairs. The mansion seemed less intimidating in daylight, the rooms warmer, the spaces less vast. She followed the scent of breakfast to the kitchen, where Eleanor was placing pancakes shaped like teddy bears onto a plate. "There you are, dear. Hungry this morning?" The older woman's smile was genuine, her eyes kind. Sophie nodded, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "Where's Dr. Alexander?" "He had an early meeting at the hospital," Eleanor replied, placing the plate before her. "But he'll be back soon. He's arranged to take some time off." As Sophie ate, savoring each sweet bite, she gathered courage to ask the question that had burned in her mind since dawn. "Eleanor, what does RNA mean?" The older woman's hand stilled over the stove. "Where did you hear that, child?" I heard Alexander on the phone. He mentioned RNA." Eleanor's face grew serious. She wiped her hands on her apron and sat beside Sophie. "Those are initials, dear. Sometimes adults use them as shorthand for names, like Rebecca and Andrew." Sophie suggested, using her aunt and uncle's full names instead of the Aunt Diane and Uncle Gregory she'd been forced to use. Surprise flickered across Eleanor's features. "Sharp as a tack, aren't you, Miss?" That's what he meant. She hesitated, clearly measuring her next words. "Reynolds is concerned about certain things regarding your aunt and uncle. That's why he's working with Mr. Peterson." "Who's Mr. Peterson?" "James Peterson. He's Dr. Reynolds' lawyer and friend. He's coming here this afternoon to talk about your situation." Sophie pushed her plate away, appetite vanishing. "Are they going to make me go back?" Eleanor's hand covered hers, warm and reassuring. "No, child. They're working to make sure you stay right here where you're safe." The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Eleanor frowned, checking her watch. "That's odd. We're not expecting anyone until afternoon." She went to answer the door, instructing Sophie to finish her breakfast. But Sophie slipped from her stool and followed at a distance, peering around the corner into the grand foyer. Eleanor opened the massive front door to reveal Diane Collins standing on the doorstep. Sophie's heart lurched painfully in her chest. Her aunt looked impeccable in a tailored blue dress, her makeup flawless, her smile practiced and pleasant. Nothing like the woman who had wielded the hose with such cruelty. "Good morning," Diane said sweetly. "I'm Rebecca Collins, Sophie's aunt. I've come to check on my niece." Eleanor's posture stiffened. "Dr. Reynolds isn't home at the moment." "That's quite all right. I'm here to see Sophie. Family matters, you understand." Sophie pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself invisible. The sound of her aunt's voice sent cold fear washing through her body. "Sophie is resting," Eleanor said firmly. "After yesterday's events, she needs time to recover." Diane's pleasant expression didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "I have papers here." She withdrew an envelope from her designer handbag. "Guardianship forms already signed by Sophie. See, the court granted me temporary custody after my brother's tragic passing." Sophie's breath caught. She hadn't signed anything. The lie was so bold, so blatant, it made her dizzy. Eleanor took the papers reluctantly. "I'll have to show these to Dr. Reynolds." "Of course. But surely you understand I can't leave without seeing my niece first." The poor child must be so confused, taken by a virtual stranger. Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of a car engine announced Alexander's return. His Bentley swept up the circular driveway, coming to a smooth stop. He emerged, his expression darkening at the sight of Diane in his doorway. "Mrs. Collins," he said, climbing the steps with measured pace. "This is unexpected." Diane turned her practiced smile on him. "Dr. Reynolds, I've brought the guardianship papers. There seems to have been a misunderstanding yesterday. You had no right to take Sophie from her legal guardian." Alexander took the papers from Eleanor, scanning them with narrowed eyes. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sophie knew he had spotted the forged signature. Her clumsy 7-year-old hand could never have produced the flowing script on the page. But instead of confronting Diane, he simply folded the papers and tucked them into his jacket pocket. "These will need to be reviewed by my lawyer. He'll be here this afternoon." "That's unnecessary. The papers are in order." Diane's voice took on an edge. "I'd like to see Sophie now." Alexander stepped fully into the doorway, his tall frame blocking any view of the interior. Sophie is still traumatized from yesterday's incident. My professional opinion as a doctor is that seeing you right now would be detrimental to her psychological well-being. Diane's mask slipped for just a moment, anger flashing in her eyes. You can't keep her from her family. I'm not keeping her from family, Alexander replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. I'm protecting her from abuse. The authorities have been notified about yesterday's incident, Mrs. Collins. Several neighbors witnessed it. Those neighbors misunderstood a simple disciplinary action, Diane countered, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. Did they misunderstand the words you spoke, the accusations you hurled at a child who just lost both parents? Alexander's voice remained calm, but steel ran through every syllable. Sophie stays here for now. My lawyer will contact yours. Good day, Mrs. Collins. He stepped back, and Eleanor began to close the door. Diane's composure cracked. This isn't over Reynolds. That child comes with certain assets. My brother's estate belongs to his family, not to his doctor friend. Alexander paused, his expression hard as granite. Is that what this is about, Thomas's money, not the well-being of his daughter? The door closed on Diane's flushed face. Alexander turned, noticing Sophie for the first time, small and trembling, in the hallway shadow. His expression softened immediately. Sophie, he said gently, approaching her with open hands. You heard all that, didn't you? She nodded, her eyes huge in her pale face. I didn't sign anything. She lied. I know. He knelt to her level, meeting her gaze directly. And I won't let her take you back there. Not tomorrow, not ever. Sophie looked into his eyes, searching for deceit, for the inevitable disappointment adults always seem to bring. Instead, she found only steady resolve and something else, a fierce protectiveness that reminded her of how her father used to look at her. Promise, she whispered. Alexander reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he placed his hand gently on her shoulder. I promise, Sophie. From this moment on, I am your shield. Nothing will harm you while I draw breath. The absolute conviction in his voice finally penetrated the wall of fear and grief that had surrounded Sophie since the night of the fire. She launched herself forward, wrapping her arms around his neck in a desperate embrace. Alexander's arms encircled her, strong and secure, as her tears soaked his shoulder. Eleanor watched from a few steps away, her own eyes moist. In that embrace, something fundamental had changed. A new bond had formed from the ashes of tragedy, fragile yet, but with the potential to grow into something unbreakable. Outside, Diane Collins sat in her luxury car, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Her phone rang and she answered it with a snap. It's me. We have a problem. Reynolds knows something. We need to move faster. The male voice on the other end sounded panicked. The debts are coming due, Rebecca. They're threatening me now. Pull yourself together, Andrew, she hissed. The insurance money isn't enough. We need the estate, all of it. And the only thing standing between us and millions is that little girl and her doctor protector. As she drove away from the mansion, she didn't notice the gardener working near the gate, close enough to hear every word of her conversation. Eleanor Wilson's brother had always been good at blending into the background, a skill that would soon prove invaluable to Alexander's cause. Phoenix from the Ashes, Part 2. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Alexander Reynolds' study as James Peterson spread documents across the mahogany desk. At 53, the attorney carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced countless courtroom battles and emerged victorious. His silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes gave him an appearance of distinguished wisdom, though the slight loosening of his tie suggested the gravity of their current situation. I've reviewed the guardianship papers, James said, his voice low and measured. They're forgeries and not particularly good ones. The signature allegedly belonging to Sophie bears no resemblance to a child's handwriting. Alexander stood by the window watching Sophie in the garden below. Eleanor had taken her outside to plant tulip bulbs, a simple activity to keep her hands busy and her mind engaged with thoughts of future blooms. Even from this distance, Alexander could see the careful way she handled each bulb, as though afraid of damaging something so fragile. Can we use that to keep her here? Alexander asked without turning. It's evidence of fraud which helps our case, but it's just the beginning, James replied, shuffling through more papers. The real issue is proving Rebecca and Gregory Collins are unfit guardians. Yesterday's incident helps, but we need more. Alexander turned from the window, his expression hardening. What about Thomas's will? Have you found it? James shook his head. Not yet. According to county records, Thomas Morgan filed a new will just 3 months before the fire, but the original document is missing from the courthouse archives. There's only a notation that it exists. Convenient, Alexander muttered, settling into his leather chair. What about the fire investigation? Initial report ruled it accidental. Faulty wiring in the west wing of the house, James said, pulling out a folder with the fire department's insignia. But I've requested a more thorough review. Something doesn't add up. Alexander opened his desk drawer and withdrew a crumpled note, placing it carefully on the desk between them. Thomas left this with his lawyer to give to me if anything happened to him. I received it after the funeral. James picked up the paper, reading the hastily scribbled message. If anything happens to me, suspect RNA. Rebecca and Andrew, James said, using their legal names rather than the names they went by socially. He suspected them of what exactly? I don't know, Alexander admitted. Thomas and I spoke about 3 weeks before the fire. He mentioned having concerns about his sister's husband's financial troubles, but he was vague. Said he'd explain when I returned from my conference in Zurich. James's eyes narrowed. And then the fire happened while you were overseas. Yes. By the time I got back, Thomas and Sarah were dead, and Sophie had been taken by Rebecca and Gregory. Alexander's voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the desk. I should have been here. You couldn't have known, James said, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. But we can make this right now. I've hired Daniel Martinez, former FBI, now private investigator. He's looking into Gregory Collins's finances. Alexander nodded, taking a deep breath to compose himself. Good. What's our immediate strategy for Sophie? I've filed an emergency petition for temporary guardianship on your behalf, James explained, retrieving a document from his briefcase. Based on your long-standing relationship with the family, Thomas's apparent wishes, and the evidence of mistreatment, we have a hearing set for next Friday. 9 days, Alexander murmured, glancing again toward the window where Sophie was now patting soil over a row of planted bulbs. What are the chances? Judge Henderson is presiding. She's tough but fair, especially in cases involving children. James hesitated, then added, but there's something else you should know. The hospital board called my office this morning. Alexander's jaw tightened. Let me guess. They're concerned about the publicity this might generate. Edward Thornton specifically expressed concern about your ability to maintain your duties as hospital director while involved in a custody dispute. Thornton, Alexander scoffed. He's been waiting for an excuse to push me out for years. He suggested you might want to consider a leave of absence, James said carefully, for appearance's sake. Alexander was silent for a long moment, his gaze returning to Sophie in the garden. The child had stopped planting and was looking up at a maple tree where a cardinal had landed on a branch. Even from this distance, he could see wonder replacing sorrow on her small face, if only for a moment. I've spent 30 years building my career, Alexander finally said. Dedicated my life to that hospital. But I made a promise to Thomas and to Sophie. If Thornton wants a fight, he'll get one. James nodded, unsurprised. I expected you'd say that. Just be prepared. Rebecca and Gregory will use your position, your age, your single status, anything they can to paint you as unsuitable. And we'll use the truth, Alexander replied firmly. Which reminds me we should speak with Dr. Rachel Kim. I want Sophie to begin therapy sessions for her trauma. Rachel's the best child psychologist in the state, and she can also document Sophie's condition. Good thinking, James agreed, making a note. Professional documentation will strengthen our case significantly. A knock at the study door interrupted them. Eleanor entered, her expression somber. Dr. Reynolds' Sophie is asking for you. She seems upset. Alexander was on his feet immediately. What happened? She saw something in the garden that frightened her, Eleanor explained. She won't tell me what, but she's trembling. Something awful. Alexander hurried outside, James following close behind. They found Sophie sitting on a stone bench, knees pulled to her chest, eyes wide with fear. When she saw Alexander, she jumped up and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. What is it, Sophie? He asked, gently kneeling to her level. What frightened you? I saw Uncle Gregory, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He was watching me through the fence. When I looked at him, he put his finger to his lips like this. She demonstrated the universal sign for silence. Then he disappeared. Alexander exchanged a sharp glance with James before turning back to Sophie with a reassuring smile. It's okay now. You're safe here. He said he'd come back for me. Sophie continued, trembling harder. Before, when I was at their house, he said if I told anyone about the fire alarm, they'd hurt you. Alexander went completely still. The fire alarm, Sophie. What about the fire alarm? Sophie's eyes darted nervously between Alexander and James. I saw Uncle Gregory doing something to it the day before the fire. He was opening a little box on the wall and pulling out wires. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was fixing it, but then he told me not to tell Daddy. James Peterson moved closer, his voice gentle but serious. Sophie, this is very important. Did you tell anyone else about this? She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I told Daddy that night. He got really quiet and went to his office to make a phone call. The next morning, he took me to school and said he loved me very much. That was the last time. Her voice broke, unable to continue. Alexander pulled her close, one hand cradling the back of her head. Over her shoulder, his eyes met James's, a silent understanding passing between them. The fire had not been an accident. You're very brave to tell us this, Alexander said softly. And I promise you no one is going to hurt me, and no one is going to take you away. James was already on his phone, stepping away to make a call. Daniel, it's Peterson. I need surveillance on the Reynolds estate immediately. And contact Chief Williams at the fire department. We need to reopen the Morgan House fire investigation. We have new evidence. After ensuring Sophie was safely inside with Eleanor, Alexander and James conducted a thorough check of the perimeter. They found footprints in the soft earth near the garden fence, confirming Sophie's story. We'll need to increase security, Alexander said as they walked back to the house. I want cameras installed today, and I'll hire private security until this is resolved. Agreed, James said grimly. Rebecca and Gregory are getting desperate. Gregory's gambling debts are substantial according to Daniel's preliminary findings. Over $750,000 to some very dangerous people in Atlantic City. Which gives them a powerful motive, Alexander concluded. Thomas's estate is worth millions, and Sophie is the sole heir. If they gained guardianship, they'd control everything until she turned 18, James finished. And 11 years is plenty of time to misappropriate funds, especially with creditors breathing down their necks. Back in the study, they worked quickly to develop a comprehensive strategy. Alexander called Dr. Rachel Kim and arranged for Sophie's first appointment the following morning. James coordinated with Daniel Martinez to gather evidence about Gregory's gambling debts and possible connections to the fire. By late afternoon, security personnel had arrived to patrol the grounds, and technicians were installing cameras at strategic points around the property. Alexander found Sophie in the library, curled in a window seat, with a book of fairy tales Eleanor had given her. Quite a lot of activity today, he said, sitting beside her arm. Are you doing okay? Sophie nodded, though her fingers fidgeted with the book's pages. Are all these people here because of Uncle Gregory? They're here to make sure we're both safe, Alexander explained, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups need help keeping their promises, and these people are helping me keep my promise to you. Sophie considered this, then asked in a small voice, Did Uncle Gregory hurt my parents? The question hit Alexander like a physical blow. He'd known it was coming, had prepared for it, yet the direct simplicity of her words still struck him to his core. He took a deep breath before answering. We don't know for certain yet, he said truthfully, but Mr. Peterson and some very smart investigators are working to find out exactly what happened. What's important is that you're safe now and that you know none of what happened was your fault. But Aunt Diane said, What she said was wrong, Alexander interrupted firmly. She was cruel and she was lying. Your parents loved you more than anything in this world. The fire was not your fault. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, seeming to accept his words at least for now. Alexander knew this conversation was just the beginning, that healing from such trauma would take time, patience, and professional help. Tomorrow we're going to visit a special doctor named Dr. Kim, he explained. She helps children talk about difficult feelings and scary memories. Like a heart doctor helps with broken hearts, Sophie asked, remembering their conversation from the night before. Alexander smiled gently. Similar, but Dr. Kim helps with the kind of heart that feels emotions, not the kind that pumps blood. She's very kind, and talking to her might help those bad dreams you've been having. Sophie nodded solemnly. Will you stay with me? For the first meeting, yes, Alexander assured her. And afterwards, we can get ice cream if you'd like. A small smile touched Sophie's lips, the first real smile he'd seen from her eyes. It disappeared quickly, but its brief presence felt like a victory. The next morning brought a crisp autumn chill. Alexander helped Sophie select an outfit from the new clothes that had been delivered, a simple blue dress with leggings and a warm cardigan. Eleanor braided her hair, and for a moment, with her cheeks slightly flushed from the warm breakfast and her eyes brighter, Sophie looked like any normal child preparing for an outing. The illusion shattered when they reached Alexander's car. Sophie stopped abruptly, her body going rigid at the sight of a black sedan parked behind them. Who's that? She whispered, shrinking against Alexander's side. That's Mr. Reed, Alexander explained calmly. He's a security officer who's going to follow us today to make sure we're safe. Think of him as our own personal bodyguard. Sophie studied the stoic man behind the wheel, then looked up at Alexander with solemn eyes. Like in the movies. Something like that. He smiled, relieved at her acceptance. Shall we go? Dr. Rachel Kim's office was located in a converted Victorian house in a quiet neighborhood. The waiting room featured comfortable furniture sized for both adults and children, walls painted in soothing blues and greens, and shelves filled with books and toys. Sophie stayed close to Alexander's side, her eyes darting nervously around the unfamiliar space. Rachel Kim greeted them warmly. At 42, she had a calm presence and kind eyes that had helped countless traumatized children over her 15-year career. She knelt to Sophie's level, introducing herself without overwhelming the child with attention or questions. I'm very glad to meet you, Sophie, she said simply. Would you like to see my special playroom while I talk with Dr. Reynolds for a few minutes? Sophie hesitated, looking to Alexander for reassurance. It's okay, he encouraged. I'll be right out here and you can come back anytime you want. Eventually, Sophie nodded and followed Dr. Kim's assistant, though she kept glancing back until she disappeared through a brightly colored door. Thank you for seeing us on such short notice, Alexander said once they were seated in Rachel's consultation room. James Peterson explained the situation, Rachel replied. Fire trauma, loss of both parents, alleged abuse by relatives, and now a custody battle. That's an enormous burden for a 7-year-old. There's more, Alexander said grimly, explaining Sophie's revelation about Gregory tampering with the fire alarm. She's also having severe nightmares about the fire, and yesterday she believes she saw her uncle watching her through the garden fence. Rachel's expression remained professional, but her eyes reflected concern. These are serious traumatic stressors. The nightmares are a classic symptom of PTSD in children. The possible sighting yesterday, whether real or perceived, indicates she doesn't feel fully safe. What can I do? Alexander asked, leaning forward in his chair. Consistency, safety, and patience, Rachel advised. Children who've experienced trauma need predictable routines, clear boundaries, and abundant reassurance. But most importantly, they need to know they're believed. I do believe her, Alexander said firmly. Rachel nodded. Good. Now, with your permission, I'd like to spend some time with Sophie alone. I use art therapy and play techniques that help children express what they can't put into words. Of course, Alexander agreed, though the thought of leaving Sophie made him unexpectedly anxious. Will you document your findings for the custody hearing? Yes, I'll prepare a comprehensive report, Rachel confirmed. And Alexander, one more thing. How are you holding up? This situation would be stressful for anyone, let alone someone juggling hospital responsibilities. Alexander hesitated, unaccustomed to being asked about his own well-being. I'm fine. My focus is Sophie. Rachel's knowing look suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but she didn't press further. Well, my door's open if that changes. Supporting a traumatized child requires tremendous emotional resources. You'll be better able to help Sophie if you're also taking care of yourself. In the playroom, Sophie sat at a small table, colored markers spread before her as she drew on a large sheet of paper. The assistant had given her space, sitting quietly in the corner with a book. When Rachel entered, Sophie's hand stilled, watching the psychologist cautiously. That's a very interesting drawing, Rachel observed, sitting across from her. Would you like to tell me about it? Sophie looked down at her work, a house with orange and red flames shooting from the windows. A small figure stood outside while two larger figures remained inside the flames. It's my house and my parents. Her voice was barely audible. I see, Rachel said gently. That must have been very scary. Sophie nodded, adding more orange to the flames. I couldn't help them. You know, Sophie, many children who experienced something scary like you did think they should have been able to do something to stop it, Rachel explained. But the truth is, children aren't supposed to save grown-ups. Grown-ups are supposed to protect children. Sophie considered this, her brow furrowed in concentration. After a moment, she reached for a black marker and added another figure to the picture, a man standing near the small figure outside the house. Who's that? Rachel asked. That's Alexander, Sophie replied. He wasn't really there, but I wish he was. He would have saved my parents. The session continued for nearly an hour, with Sophie gradually opening up through her drawings and the carefully arranged dolls and toys in Rachel's office. She revealed more details about life with her aunt and uncle after her parents' death, being forced to sleep in an unheated storage room, denied meals as punishment for crying, and being told repeatedly that she had caused her parents' death. By the time Alexander was invited back in, Sophie had created 3 drawings. The burning house, a garden scene with a small girl planting flowers, and a crude but recognizable portrait of Alexander, with an oversized heart visible in his chest. Sophie has been very brave today, Rachel told him while the child gathered her drawings. We've made an excellent start. Alexander noticed Sophie's exhausted expression, the emotional toll of the session evident in her drooping shoulders and heavy eyelids. You did wonderfully, he assured her, kneeling to her level. How about that ice cream I promised? The small ice cream parlor 2 blocks from Rachel's office provided a perfect respite. Sophie's mood lifted slightly as she deliberated between chocolate and strawberry, eventually choosing both. Alexander watched her eat, relief washing over him at this small moment of normalcy. Their peaceful interlude was shattered when his phone rang. The hospital's number flashed on the screen. Dr. Reynolds, he answered, stepping slightly away from the table while keeping Sophie in sight. Alexander, it's Edward Thornton. The board chairman's clipped tone suggested this wasn't a social call. We need you at the hospital immediately. There's a situation with the cardiac surgery department. I'm in the middle of something important, Edward, Alexander replied, watching Sophie carefully scrape the last bits of ice cream from her bowl. Can it wait until tomorrow? No, it cannot. Thornton's voice hardened. Either you come in today to address this matter, or we'll be forced to make decisions without you. Your choice. Alexander glanced at his watch. It was just past noon. Give me an hour. After ending the call, he returned to Sophie, who was watching him with wary eyes. Is something wrong? She asked. I need to stop by the hospital for a little while, he explained, keeping his voice light. Would you like to see where I work? Eleanor can meet us there, and you can wait in my office while I attend a meeting. There's a comfortable couch, and I have some books and drawing supplies. Sophie nodded, though uncertainty clouded her expression. Alexander helped her with her coat, and they drove to Pennsylvania Memorial Hospital, the gleaming glass and steel building where he had spent most of his adult life. Several staff members greeted him as they walked through the main entrance, their curious glances at Sophie mostly concealed behind professional smiles. Alexander led her to the executive wing, where his corner office overlooked the hospital gardens. This is where you fix hearts, Sophie asked, looking around at the spacious room with its medical diplomas and awards lining the walls. This is where I do paperwork. Alexander smiled. The actual heart surgeries happen in the operating rooms 2 floors down. Eleanor arrived shortly after bringing a small bag with activities for Sophie. I've brought your favorite teddy bear, she told the child, and some new colored pencils. Thank you for coming, Alexander said gratefully. This shouldn't take long. Thornton's probably just flexing his administrative muscles. How wrong he was. When Alexander entered the boardroom, he found not just Edward Thornton, but the entire executive committee waiting, their expressions uniformly grave. What's this about? Alexander asked, remaining standing despite the empty chair clearly intended for him. Thornton, a thin man with cold eyes and precisely combed silver hair, slid a newspaper across the table. This morning's edition, page 3. Alexander picked up the paper, his stomach tightening as he read the headline, Hospital Director in Custody Battle Questions, raised about judgment and priorities. The article outlined the situation with Sophie in slanted terms, quoting sources close to the family, who questioned Alexander's motives and ability to care for a traumatized child while running a major hospital. Rebecca Collins, Alexander said flatly, dropping the paper onto the table. This has her fingerprints all over it. Regardless of the source, Thornton replied, the concerns are valid. The board feels your personal situation is becoming a distraction. A distraction, Alexander echoed, his voice dangerously quiet. Protecting an abused child who lost her parents is a distraction. Your judgment is compromised, Thornton continued unmoved. Taking a child from her legal guardians, making accusations about a house fire that was officially ruled accidental. Her legal guardians were spraying her with a garden hose and telling her she killed her parents. Alexander interrupted, his control slipping. And that fire investigation was incomplete at best, deliberately mishandled at worst. Thornton exchanged glances with the other board members. This is exactly what concerns us. These conspiracy theories, this emotional involvement, it's not like you, Alexander. The board has voted, another member interjected, her voice gentler. We're asking you to take a leave of absence until this personal matter is resolved. Alexander looked around the table at his colleagues of many years. Most couldn't meet his gaze. I've given 30 years to this hospital, he said quietly. Built the cardiac program from nothing into one of the top 10 in the country, and this is how you repay that loyalty. This isn't personal, Thornton insisted. It's about the hospital's reputation and your ability to fulfill your responsibilities. Alexander stood silent for a long moment, weighing his options. Then, with deliberate movements, he removed his hospital ID badge and placed it on the table. I won't be taking a leave, he said calmly. I'm resigning as director. Dr. Matthews is more than capable of assuming the role. Gasps and murmurs circled the table. Even Thornton looked shocked. Alexander, that's not necessary. It is necessary, Alexander cut him off, because you've made something very clear today. You've shown me where my priorities truly belong. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. I'll continue my surgical cases for now. My patients shouldn't suffer because of hospital politics. But find another director. I'm done. He walked out his steps, growing lighter with each stride down the corridor. For the first time in decades, he felt unburdened, clear in his purpose. When he reached his office, he found Sophie curled on the couch with Eleanor reading a book together. That was quick, Eleanor remarked, noting his expression. What happened? A necessary recalibration, Alexander replied cryptically. Sophie, how would you feel about helping me pack up some things? I think I'll be spending more time at home from now on. As they gathered a few personal items from his office, Alexander's phone rang again. This time it was James Peterson. We've got something, the attorney said without preamble. Daniel found Gregory Collins's bookie. The man's willing to talk in exchange for certain considerations. And the fire investigator found evidence that the alarm system was definitely tampered with, wires cut exactly as Sophie described. That's excellent, Alexander replied, watching Sophie carefully place a framed photograph of his late wife into a box. What about Thomas's will? Still missing from the courthouse, James admitted. But Daniel's looking into Rebecca and Gregory's movements around the time it disappeared. Oh, and one more thing. Child Protective Services is sending someone to interview Sophie tomorrow morning. Standard procedure for the guardianship hearing. We'll be ready, Alexander assured him. And James, I resigned as hospital director today. A brief silence. Are you sure that was wise? The hearing is in 8 days. It was necessary, Alexander said firmly. I need to show the court where my priorities lie. Sophie needs me fully present, not divided between responsibilities. After ending the call, Alexander knelt beside Sophie, who was examining a small glass paperweight containing a preserved butterfly. Sophie, he said gently, tomorrow a person from an organization called Child Protective Services is going to come talk to you. Their job is to make sure children are safe and well cared for. Sophie's fingers tightened around the paperweight. Will they take me away? No, Alexander assured her. They're just going to ask some questions about how you're doing here, and maybe some questions about what happened at your aunt and uncle's house. All you have to do is tell the truth, just like you did with Dr. Kim today. Sophie nodded solemnly. I can do that. As they drove home, the autumn sunset painted the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples. Sophie watched the colors silently from the back seat, her small face reflected in the window glass. Alexander, she asked suddenly, are you sad about leaving your job? He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, surprised by her perceptiveness. Not sad exactly. I'll still be a doctor and help people. I just won't be in charge of all the other doctors anymore. Did you leave because of me? The directness of her question caught him off guard. He considered deflecting, but decided on honesty. I left because I realized what was most important to me now, and that's keeping my promise to your father and to you. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. My daddy would be glad you're helping me. Yes, Alexander agreed, his throat tightening unexpectedly. He would. Back at the mansion as Eleanor prepared dinner, Alexander received another call, this time from Daniel Martinez. The private investigator's news was both alarming and confirming. Gregory Collins had been seen meeting with a man known to law enforcement for arson-for-hire schemes just days before the Morgan house fire. We're building a solid case, Daniel reported. But be careful, these people are desperate and dangerous. The security measures you've implemented are good, but stay vigilant. That night, as Alexander checked on Sophie before retiring to his own room, he found her awake staring at the ceiling. Can't sleep, he asked softly, sitting on the edge of her bed. She shook her head. I keep thinking about tomorrow. What if I say the wrong thing to the person coming to talk to me? There is no wrong thing, Alexander assured her. Just tell the truth about what happened and how you feel. Sophie bit her lip, then asked in a whisper, what if they don't believe me? Aunt Diane said no one would ever believe anything I said. Alexander felt a surge of anger toward Rebecca Collins, quickly suppressed for Sophie's sake. I believe you, he said firmly. Dr. Kim believes you, and the truth has a way of making itself known even when people try to hide it. Sophie seemed to consider this, then reached for her teddy bear, clutching it close. Will you tell me a story about my daddy when you were friends? Alexander smiled, settling more comfortably on the bed. Did I ever tell you about the time your father and I climbed Mount Washington in New Hampshire? We got caught in an unexpected snowstorm. He spoke softly, recounting adventures and quiet moments shared with Thomas Morgan over decades of friendship. As Sophie's eyelids grew heavy, the tension gradually left her small body. By the time she drifted off to sleep, Alexander had made a silent vow. Rebecca and Gregory Collins would pay for what they had done, not just for Thomas and Sarah's sake, but for the little girl who deserved justice and a chance to rebuild her life from the ashes of tragedy. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of the old mansion. Somewhere in the darkness, Rebecca and Gregory Collins were plotting their next move. But for tonight at least, Sophie was safe sleeping under the watchful eye of a man who had rediscovered his purpose in the most unexpected way by becoming a shield for a child who had lost everything. Phoenix from the Ashes, Part 3. Morning light filtered through the curtains as Sophie sat on the edge of her bed dressed in a simple navy dress Eleanor had chosen for her interview with Child Protective Services. Her small fingers fidgeted with the hem of her skirt, her eyes fixed on the door waiting. Alexander had promised to come up before the social worker arrived, and Sophie clung to that promise like a lifeline. A soft knock preceded Alexander's entrance. He was dressed more formally than usual, a charcoal suit replacing his casual attire from previous days. But his warm smile remained unchanged as he crossed the room to sit beside her. "You look very nice," he said, his voice gentle. "How are you feeling?" "Scared," Sophie admitted, no longer trying to hide her emotions from him. In the few days since he'd rescued her from her aunt and uncle's cruelty, Alexander had created a space where honesty felt safe. "That's perfectly normal," he assured her. "But remember what we talked about last night?" Sophie nodded. "Just tell the truth." "Exactly." Alexander placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Mrs. Winters from CPS is here to make sure you're safe and well cared for. She might ask some difficult questions about what happened at your aunt and uncle's house or about the fire. It's okay if you don't remember everything. It's even okay if you cry. There are no wrong answers when you're telling the truth." Sophie's gaze dropped into her hands, now tightly clasped in her lap. "What if she doesn't believe me?" Alexander tilted her chin up, gently meeting her eyes. "I believe you. Mr. Peterson believes you. Dr. Kim believes you. And Mrs. Winters is trained to listen to children and understand them. Her job is to help you, not to doubt you." The doorbell echoed through the mansion and Sophie stiffened. Alexander squeezed her hand. "Ready." She took a deep breath, summoning courage beyond her years. "Ready." Alexander led her downstairs to the formal sitting room, where Eleanor had prepared tea and a plate of Sophie's favorite cookies, a small comfort amid the tension. Courtney Winters, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, waited for them. She smiled as Sophie entered, her expression warm but professional. "You must be Sophie," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Mrs. Winters. It's very nice to meet you." Sophie shook the offered hand timidly. "Hello. Mrs. Winters would like to talk with you privately," Alexander explained. "I'll be right outside if you need me, and Eleanor will bring you anything you'd like." Sophie's fingers tightened around his momentarily before she released him, straightening her shoulders with determination. "Okay." Alexander left the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. He paced the hallway, stopping occasionally to peer through the partially open doorway, watching Sophie's serious expression as she answered questions he couldn't hear. The interview lasted nearly 2 hours. When Mrs. Winters finally emerged, her professional demeanor was intact, but Alexander noted the slight tightness around her eyes. "Dr. Reynolds, could we speak privately?" she requested. He nodded, glancing back at Sophie, who sat perfectly still on the sofa, her untouched cookie crumbling on the plate beside her. "Eleanor will stay with her," he said, leading Mrs. Winters to his study. Once seated across from him, Courtney Winters opened her folder, revealing pages of notes. "I need to be straightforward with you, Dr. Reynolds. Sophie has described serious abuse and neglect during her time with Mr. and Mrs. Collins." "Yes," Alexander replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I witnessed some of it myself." She also shared details about seeing her uncle tampering with the fire alarm system before the fire that killed her parents. Mrs. Winters looked up from her notes, meeting his eyes directly. "That's an extremely serious allegation. One that's being investigated by the fire department and police as we speak," Alexander confirmed. "We have witnesses and physical evidence supporting Sophie's account." Mrs. Winters nodded. "I'll be including all of this in my report to the court. However, I must also assess your suitability as a guardian." She referred to her notes again. "You're 55, recently resigned from your position as hospital director, no children of your own, never married." "Widowed," Alexander corrected. "My wife Catherine died 8 years ago." "I apologize for the error," Mrs. Winters said sincerely. Still taking on the care of a traumatized 7-year-old is a monumental responsibility, especially for someone without parenting experience. Alexander leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. Mrs. Winters, I've known Sophie since the day she was born. Her father was my closest friend for over 30 years. I'm her godfather. While I may not have experience as a parent, I understand the responsibility I'm undertaking, and I'm fully committed to giving Sophie the stable, loving home she deserves. And you resigned from your position as hospital director to focus on Sophie's needs, Alexander finished. I'll continue my surgical practice on a reduced schedule, but Sophie is my priority now. Mrs. Winters made several more notes, then closed her folder. Thank you for your candor, Dr. Reynolds. I'll be submitting my report to Judge Henderson this afternoon. The hearing is still scheduled for next Friday. And your recommendation? Alexander couldn't help asking. Mrs. Winters stood, straightening her jacket. I don't discuss my recommendations before filing to Reynolds. However, she paused, her professional mask slipping slightly. That child has been through hell. Right now she feels safe with you. That counts for a great deal in my assessment. After Mrs. Winters departed, Alexander found Sophie still sitting exactly as he'd left her, her small form rigid with tension. She looked up as he entered, eyes searching his face anxiously. Did I do okay? She whispered. Alexander sat beside her, gathering her small hands in his. You did perfectly, Sophie. Mrs. Winters was very impressed with your bravery. She asked a lot of questions about the fire, Sophie said, her voice barely audible, and about Aunt Diane and Uncle Gregory, and about you. What did you tell her about me? Alexander asked gently. I told her you make me feel safe, Sophie answered simply, and that you don't make me sleep in the cold room or go without dinner, and that you let me keep my teddy bear. The stark contrast between these basic dignities and what Sophie had endured made Alexander's heart constrict painfully. Well, he managed, keeping his voice light. I think we both had quite enough of serious talks for one morning. How about a walk in the garden? The roses are still blooming in the east corner. Sophie nodded, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. As they stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, Alexander's phone rang. James Peterson's name flashed on the screen. Go ahead with Eleanor, Alexander told Sophie, gesturing toward the rose garden. I'll join you in a minute. He answered the call, watching as Eleanor led Sophie down the stone path. James, any news? Big news, the attorney replied, his voice charged with excitement. Daniel's source came through. We now have Gregory Collins's bookie willing to testify that Gregory was desperate to pay off nearly $800,000 in gambling debts around the time of the fire. And better yet, the fire investigator has confirmed evidence of tampering with the alarm system, exactly matching Sophie's description. Alexander closed his eyes briefly, a wave of vindication washing over him. What about Thomas's will? Still missing from the courthouse archives, James admitted. But we've traced Rebecca and Gregory's movements. They were both at the courthouse the day after the fire, allegedly filing initial guardianship papers. The clerk remembers Rebecca asking for directions to the records room, claiming she needed to check something in her brother's will. She took it, Alexander said flatly, or destroyed it. Most likely. But here's where it gets interesting. Thomas's lawyer, Martin Green, swears he made a copy before filing the original. He's been searching his archives and thinks he might have stored it off-site. He's checking his storage facility today. That would be the final piece, Alexander said, hope rising in his chest. What about our hearing preparations? We're in good shape. Dr. Kim's assessment of Sophie strongly supports our case. The neighbors who witnessed the garden hose incident are willing to testify. And I've submitted a formal request to have the Collins' finances investigated. Excellent work, James. Keep me. A scream cut through the air, high and terrified. Sophie. Alexander dropped the phone, sprinting toward the rose garden. He rounded the hedge to see Eleanor on the ground, a gash on her forehead, blood seeping between her fingers as she pressed her hand against the wound. Sophie was nowhere in sight. Eleanor, what happened? Where's Sophie? Alexander demanded, kneeling beside the injured woman. A man, Eleanor gasped, struggling to sit up. Jumped the fence, hit me, took Sophie. Black car waiting outside the gate. Her eyes filled with tears. I tried to stop him, Dr. Reynolds, I tried. Cold terror gripped Alexander's heart. Which way did they go? Eleanor pointed with a trembling hand toward the east gate. Alexander was on his feet instantly, running toward the road. The security guard. Where was the security guard? He found the answer as he reached the gate. The man lay unconscious, a dark bruise forming on his temple. The street beyond was empty. Sophie was gone. Alexander sprinted back to where he'd dropped his phone, snatching it up with shaking hands. James's voice was still coming through, alarmed and questioning. What's happening? Alexander. They've taken her, Alexander gasped into the phone. Someone attacked Eleanor and the guard and took Sophie. Call the police now. And Daniel, get Daniel on this immediately. The next hour passed in a blur of police sirens, questions and mounting fear. Officers swarmed the property, taking statements from Eleanor and the security guard who had regained consciousness but remembered nothing beyond a sudden blow to the head. Crime scene technicians photographed footprints in the soft earth near the fence and tire tracks on the gravel outside the gate. Alexander paced the length of his study, unable to sit still, his mind racing with horrific possibilities. James arrived bringing Daniel Martinez with him. The private investigator's expression was grim as he assessed the situation. Professional job, Daniel noted, reviewing the preliminary police findings. They knew about the security system, took out the guard, and were in and out in under 2 minutes. Gregory Collins, Alexander asked, his voice rough with emotion. Daniel shook his head. Too sophisticated for him, but he could have hired someone. Men who owe the kind of money he does often have connections to dangerous people. Why take Sophie? James wondered aloud. If this is about the guardianship hearing, abducting her only proves they're unfit. It's not about the hearing anymore, Alexander said, a terrible clarity coming over him. They know we're closing in on them for the fire. This is about silencing the only witness. The implication hung heavy in the air. A 7-year-old girl, the only witness to Gregory's tampering with the fire alarm. A child who could send him to prison for the murder of her parents. Alexander's phone rang, an unknown number. He answered immediately, putting it on speaker. Reynolds, listen carefully. The voice was male, deliberately distorted. The girl is safe for now. Keep the police out of this if you want her to stay that way. Let me speak to Sophie, Alexander demanded, forcing his voice to remain steady. A moment of silence, then Sophie's frightened voice came through. Alexander, I'm scared. Sophie. Alexander's composure cracked. Sophie, where are you? Are you hurt? Time's up, the distorted voice returned. Here's what happens next. The guardianship hearing is in 1 week. You will withdraw your petition. You will sign a statement declaring Rebecca and Gregory Collins as Sophie's rightful guardians. You will turn over all evidence related to the Morgan House fire to us. Do this, and the girl returns unharmed. Fail, and she disappears forever. How do I know you'll return her? Alexander asked, desperately trying to keep the caller on the line while Daniel signaled to a police technician who was attempting to trace the call. You don't, the voice replied coldly, but it's the only chance she has. We'll contact you tomorrow with instructions for the evidence handover. No police. The line went dead. The technician shook his head. Burner phone, signal bounced through multiple towers. Impossible to trace. Alexander sank into a chair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. My God, James, they have her. They have Sophie. The detective in charge, a seasoned veteran named Harrington, stepped forward. Dr. Reynolds, I understand the impulse to comply with their demands, but kidnappers rarely return victims even after demands are met. What are you suggesting? Alexander asked, his voice hollow. We set up a task force immediately. Every available detective, full resources. We monitor all Collins's communications, track their movements. They'll make a mistake. They always do. And if that mistake costs Sophie her life, Alexander's voice broke on the question. Detective Harrington had no answer for that. James placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder. We need to think clearly. They want the evidence about the fire. That means they're running scared. The case against them is strong. I don't care about the case, Alexander exploded, surging to his feet. I care about Sophie. She's terrified, James. She's already lost everything once. I promised to protect her, and I failed. You haven't failed her yet, Daniel Martinez interjected quietly, but you will if you give up now. Alexander turned to the private investigator, desperation in his eyes. What would you do? Appear to comply, Daniel said without hesitation. Make them think you are giving them exactly what they want. Meanwhile, we work every angle, every connection. Rebecca and Gregory Collins didn't do this alone. Someone helped them, either hired muscle or a favor called in. We find that connection. Detective Harrington nodded slowly. It could work. We'll keep the investigation quiet, no sirens, no uniforms. Just plainclothes detectives and surveillance teams. And if they're watching the house, Alexander asked. They almost certainly are, Daniel confirmed. So we give them a show. You visibly distressed, cooperating with their demands. Meanwhile, we work from off-site locations. The plan took shape rapidly. Alexander would remain at the mansion visibly alone except for Eleanor, who insisted on staying despite her injury. James would coordinate legal maneuvers from his office, while Daniel and Detective Harrington set up a command center in a vacant house 3 streets away. As night fell, Alexander stood at his study window staring out at the darkened garden where Sophie had been taken. The house felt cavernous and empty without her small presence. He thought of her first night here, how she'd asked if her heart would ever heal. He'd promised her it would, that hearts could grow strong even around broken places. Now he wondered if his own heart could survive this new fracture. His phone rang again, the same unknown number. "Reynolds," he answered, struggling to keep his voice level. "Tomorrow, noon. Come alone to Riverside Park East entrance. Bring all evidence related to the fire investigation. No police or the girl dies." The line went dead before Alexander could respond. He immediately called Detective Harrington, relaying the instructions. The detective arrived within the hour, bringing surveillance equipment and a small transmitter. "We'll have plainclothes officers throughout the park," Harrington explained, showing Alexander the nearly invisible earpiece they had used to communicate. "You'll wear this transmitter. It looks like an ordinary tie clip. We'll hear everything." "What if they search me?" Alexander asked. "These devices are designed to evade detection," Harrington assured him. "But if you're concerned, we can use a different approach. The important thing is that you're never truly alone out there." Alexander nodded, exhaustion and fear etching deep lines in his face. "What about Sophie? How do we ensure her safety during the exchange?" Harrington and Daniel exchanged glances. "There may not be an exchange tomorrow," Daniel said carefully. "This could simply be to collect the evidence. They might hold Sophie until after the hearing." The thought of Sophie enduring days of captivity was unbearable. "I can't wait that long," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "She's 7 years old, traumatized, alone with people who have already hurt her. We need to find her now." "We're working every angle," Daniel promised. "I have contacts watching Rebecca in Gregory's house. They haven't returned home, which suggests they're staying somewhere else, likely with Sophie." "Credit cards, phone records," Alexander pressed. "All being monitored," Harrington confirmed. "But they're being careful. No unusual transactions, phones either off or left behind." The night stretched endlessly. Alexander unable to sleep, pacing from room to room in the silent mansion. He paused at Sophie's bedroom door, pushing it open to reveal the neatly made bed, the teddy bear propped against the pillows where Eleanor had placed it. A drawing lay on the nightstand, Sophie's artwork from Dr. Kim's office, showing Alexander with the oversized heart visible in his chest. Alexander picked it up, his vision blurring with tears. "I'll find you," he whispered to the empty room. "I promise, Sophie, I'll find you." Morning brought no news, no leads, no hope. Alexander moved mechanically through preparations for the park meeting, allowing Detective Harrington to fit him with the transmitter, reviewing the plan one final time. "Remember," Harrington instructed, "keep them talking as long as possible. The more they speak, the more likely they are to reveal something useful. And whatever happens, do not leave the park with them." "What if they don't bring Sophie?" Alexander asked the question that had haunted him all night. "Then we follow whoever makes the collection," Daniel said firmly. "They'll lead us back to her eventually." Noon approached with agonizing slowness. Alexander drove to Riverside Park alone. It's instructed a folder of documents on the seat beside him, copies of the fire investigators' report statements from witnesses' financial records showing Gregory's gambling debts. The originals remain secure with James, along with multiple digital copies stored in various locations. The park was busy with lunchtime visitors, making surveillance both easier and more complicated. Alexander sat on a bench near the east entrance, the folder visible on his lap, his eyes scanning constantly for any sign of Sophie or her captors. "Southwest corner," Detective Harrington's voice came through the discreet earpiece. "Man in a blue windbreaker approaching your position." Alexander spotted him immediately, mid-30s, muscular build, aviator sunglasses obscuring his eyes. He walked with the confident stride of someone accustomed to intimidating others. "Dr. Reynolds," the man said without preamble, stopping several feet away. "The folder." Alexander didn't move. "Where's Sophie?" "Safe. The folder now." "I need proof she's all right," Alexander insisted, his heart pounding. "Let me speak to her." The man's jaw tightened. "That wasn't the arrangement." "It is now," Alexander countered, fighting to keep his voice steady. "No proof, no evidence. Your employers must want this very badly if they're willing to resort to kidnapping." The man stared at him for a long moment, then pulled out a phone. He dialed, spoke briefly, then held out the device. "1 minute, no tricks." Alexander took the phone with trembling hands. Sophie, it's Alexander." "Alexander?" Her voice was thin with fear, but unmistakably hers. "Please come get me. They won't let me leave. They said I have to stay quiet or they'll hurt you." "Where are you, sweetheart? Can you see anything outside any landmarks?" I'm in a room with no windows, Sophie replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. But I heard a train earlier. And planes. Lots of planes. The man snatched the phone back. That's enough. The folder. Now. Alexander hesitated, his mind racing. Trains and planes, near transportation hubs. It narrowed the search area, but not enough. Hand it over, the man demanded, reaching for the folder. Alexander relinquished it, watching as the man flipped through the pages, confirming the contents. Is this everything? Everything I have. Alexander confirmed, the careful wording not lost on Detective Harrington, who whispered good in his ear. The man nodded once, tucking the folder inside his jacket. You'll be contacted with further instructions after you withdraw your guardianship petition. When do I get Sophie back? When it's safe for all concerned, the man replied cryptically. The girl saw things she shouldn't have. My employers need certain assurances. A chill ran down Alexander's spine. If they harm her, that's entirely up to you, Dr. Reynolds. Cooperate fully, and she'll be returned unharmed, eventually. The man turned to leave, and Alexander fought the impulse to grab him, to demand Sophie's immediate return. Detective Harrington's voice in his ear kept him rooted to the spot. Let him go. We have 4 officers tracking him. Just walk away normally. Alexander forced himself to stand, to walk in the opposite direction toward his car, every step away from the man who knew where Sophie was held, feeling like a betrayal. Back at the command center, the atmosphere was one of tense anticipation. Officers reported the messenger's movements via radio, walking south through the park, entering a black sedan, driving toward the interstate. We've got air support tracking the vehicle, Harrington informed Alexander. And we pulled a partial fingerprint from your phone, running it through the database now. What about Sophie's clues? Alexander pressed. Trains and planes. Daniel spread a map across the table. If we assume they're keeping her within a 50-mile radius, reasonable given the tight timeline, there are several areas near both railway lines and flight paths. Narrow it down further, Alexander urged. Rebecca and Gregory wouldn't risk using their own property or anywhere easily connected to them. Agreed, Daniel said, marking areas on the map. They'd want somewhere isolated but accessible. A rental property, maybe, paid in cash to avoid a paper trail. What about property owned by Gregory's gambling connections? James suggested, arriving with fresh coffee. He owes money to some dangerous people, people who might have safe houses, places to conduct business away from prying eyes. Daniel's eyes lit up. That's good, James. Very good. He pulled out his phone, dialing quickly. I need to speak to Detective Reyes in organized crime. I'm calling in that favor. The next few hours were a flurry of activity, with information flowing in from various sources. The fingerprint from the phone matched a known associate of Carlo Vincenti, a loan shark with connections to Atlantic City casinos and to Gregory Collins. Vincenti owns several properties in the tri-state area, Detective Reyes confirmed via conference call. Most under shell companies. We've been trying to build a case against him for years, but witnesses tend to disappear. We need locations. Alexander insisted, his patience wearing thin. Every minute Sophie spends with these people. I'm sending the list now, Reyes assured him. 3 properties match your criteria near both train lines and airport flight paths. We'll coordinate with SWAT for simultaneous raids if necessary. Alexander stared at the incoming information, a desperate hope kindling in his chest. She's at one of these. She has to be. The first property yielded nothing, an empty warehouse used for storing smuggled goods, but no sign of Sophie. The second, a foreclosed motel outside the city limits, contained 2 of Vincenti's men, but no child. The third location was a farmhouse, 20 miles north of the city, situated in a rural area, but with both Amtrak lines and airport approaches visible from the property. Surveillance teams reported activity, 3 vehicles, guards posted outside, curtains drawn on all windows. This is it, Alexander said with certainty. She's there, I can feel it. Detective Harrington nodded to the SWAT commander. We move at dusk. Better visibility for our thermal imaging, harder for them to spot our approach through the trees. The wait was excruciating. Alexander insisted on accompanying the raid team, refusing to be left behind despite Harrington's objections. I'll stay back with the command unit. Alexander compromised. But I need to be there. She'll be terrified, and I'm the one she trusts. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the rural landscape, the raid team moved into position. Officers in tactical gear surrounded the farmhouse, thermal imaging, confirming 5 adults inside and 1 small heat signature in an upstairs room. Target confirmed. The SWAT commander's voice crackled over the radio. Small child, upper level, northwest corner. 5 Tango's main floor. Proceeding on my mark. Alexander held his breath, his heart pounding so hard he was certain everyone could hear it. The radio crackled again. 3, 2, 1, execute. The raid unfolded with military precision. Flashbang grenades disoriented the occupants, while SWAT officers breached doors and windows simultaneously, shouting the sound of breaking glass orders to "Get down, hands where I can see them," filtered through the radio. Then a voice that stopped Alexander's heart. "Upper level clear. We have the child. Repeat. We have the child." Alexander broke free from the restraining hand of a junior officer sprinting toward the farmhouse, ignoring shouts to stay back. He raced up the driveway as a SWAT officer emerged from the front door, a small figure cradled in his arms. "Sophie," Alexander called, his voice breaking. The child's head turned at the sound of his voice. "Alexander," she cried, struggling in the officer's arms. The man set her down gently, and Sophie ran her small legs, carrying her straight into Alexander's waiting embrace. He gathered her close, tears streaming unchecked down his face as he felt her thin arms wrap around his neck with desperate strength. "You're safe now," he whispered against her hair. "You're safe. I've got you." Sophie sobbed against his shoulder, her entire body trembling. "They said you wouldn't come. They said you didn't want me anymore." "Never," Alexander said fiercely, pulling back to look into her tear-streaked face. "I will always come for you, Sophie. Always." Paramedics approached, insisting on examining Sophie despite Alexander's reluctance to release her. The examination revealed no serious physical injuries, though she was dehydrated and exhausted. More concerning were the psychological effects. She flinched at sudden movements and refused to let Alexander out of her sight, even for a moment. As Sophie was being examined, Detective Harrington approached with news. "We've arrested everyone at the scene, including Gregory Collins. He was hiding in a back room. Rebecca Collins wasn't present, but we've issued an APB. She won't get far." "Thank you," Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion, "for everything." Harrington nodded, his professional demeanor softening slightly. "The girl was very brave. She told us she kept track of the days by counting meals, and that she memorized details about her captors to tell us later. Said she knew we'd be looking for clues." Pride swelled in Alexander's chest. "She's extraordinary." After Sophie was cleared by the paramedics, Alexander took her home, carrying her from the car to the house when she fell asleep against his shoulder. Eleanor waited anxiously at the door, tears streaming down her face at the sight of Sophie safely returned. "Oh, thank God," the older woman whispered, gently stroking Sophie's hair as Alexander carried her upstairs. "Our little bird is home." Alexander laid Sophie carefully on her bed, removing only her shoes before tucking the covers around her. He placed her teddy bear in the crook of her arm, smiling as she instinctively pulled it closer. "I'll stay with her," he told Eleanor softly. "She shouldn't wake up alone." Throughout the night, Alexander maintained his vigil, dozing occasionally in the chair beside Sophie's bed, but always waking at her slightest movement. When she cried out in her sleep, he was there instantly, his gentle touch and soothing voice guiding her back from nightmares. Dawn was breaking when Sophie finally woke, fully, momentary confusion giving way to relief as she registered her surroundings in Alexander's presence. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice hoarse from sleep and lingering fear. "Of course I did," Alexander replied, moving to sit on the edge of her bed. "How are you feeling?" Sophie considered the question with a seriousness beyond her years. "Scared still, but safe now." She clutched her teddy bear tighter. "They didn't hurt me. They just locked me in a room and said I had to be quiet." "You were so brave," Alexander told her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "And so smart, telling us about the trains and planes. That helped us find you." A small, proud smile flickered across her face, quickly replaced by concern. "Will they come back for me?" "No," Alexander said firmly. "They're in jail now, and they're going to stay there for a very long time. For what they did to you and—" He hesitated, uncertain how much to share. "For what they did to my parents," Sophie finished quietly. "I heard them talking. Uncle Gregory said the fire wasn't supposed to kill anyone, just damage the house for insurance money. But the alarm didn't work because he broke it and Daddy couldn't get out in time." Alexander fought to keep his expression calm, despite the rage building inside him at this confirmation of what they'd suspected. "That's right, and now they're going to face justice for what they did." Sophie was silent for a long moment. "I miss my parents," she finally whispered, tears filling her eyes. "I miss them so much it hurts inside." "I know, sweetheart," Alexander said, gathering her into his arms as the tears began to fall. "I miss them too, and it's okay to be sad. It's okay to cry. We'll remember them together and we'll talk about them whenever you want." Sophie cried until she had no tears left, Alexander holding her through each wave of grief, offering not platitudes but presence, solid, unwavering, and complete. Later that morning, as Sophie rested under Eleanor's watchful eye, James Peterson arrived with news. Martin Green found it, he announced, triumph in his voice, as he placed a folder on Alexander's desk. Thomas Morgan's will, the real one filed 3 months before the fire. Alexander opened the folder with reverent care, scanning the legal document until he reached the critical passage. In the event of my death and that of my wife Sarah Morgan, I hereby appoint my friend and colleague, Dr. Alexander Reynolds, as legal guardian to my daughter Sophie Morgan. It has always been our wish that should tragedy befall us, Sophie would be raised by the man who has shown such genuine care and concern for her well-being since birth, and whose integrity and compassion I have witnessed throughout our 30 years of friendship. Alexander's vision blurred as he read Thomas's words, this final act of trust from beyond the grave. He knew, Alexander said softly. Somehow he sensed something might happen. This changes everything for the hearing, James confirmed. Between this, the kidnapping, and the mounting evidence about the fire, Rebecca doesn't stand a chance. The DA is charging both her and Gregory with first-degree murder, arson, kidnapping, child endangerment. The list goes on. Has Rebecca been found? Alexander asked. Apprehended trying to cross the Canadian border this morning, James replied. She's being transported back as we speak. Alexander closed the folder, a weight lifting from his shoulders. When is the hearing now? Still scheduled for Friday, though it's largely a formality at this point. Judge Henderson has reviewed the will in the CPS report. Barring any unforeseen complications, you'll be granted permanent guardianship. 5 days later, Alexander and Sophie stood before Judge Henderson in family court. Sophie wore a simple blue dress, her hair neatly braided, her small hand firmly clasped in Alexander's as the judge reviewed the final documents. Dr. Reynolds, Judge Henderson addressed him directly. Raising a child, especially one who has experienced such trauma, is no small undertaking. Are you fully prepared for this responsibility? Alexander looked down at Sophie, who gazed back with complete trust in her eyes. Your Honor, I've performed thousands of surgeries, saved hundreds of lives. But nothing has ever felt as important or as right as being there for Sophie. Yes, I am prepared to love her, to support her, to help her heal, and to give her the life her parents would have wanted for her. Judge Henderson nodded, a rare smile softening her austere features. Having reviewed all evidence, including the expressed wishes of Thomas and Sarah Morgan in their validly executed will, the recommendations of Child Protective Services, and the expert testimony of Dr. Rachel Kim, this court hereby grants permanent legal guardianship of Sophie Morgan to Dr. Alexander Reynolds, effective immediately. The gavel struck, finalizing the decision. Sophie looked up at Alexander, her expression solemn. Does this mean I can stay with you forever? Alexander knelt to her level, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Yes, Sophie, it means we're family now, officially and completely. A smile bloomed across her face, the first full, unclouded smile since the night of the fire. Good, she said simply, wrapping her arms around his neck. Because you're my home now. 1 month later, as the first snow of winter dusted the ground, Sophie stood in the garden with Alexander placing a small stone marker beneath the oak tree. They had decided together that this quiet ceremony, just the two of them, was the right way to honor Thomas and Sarah Morgan. Do you think they can see us? Sophie asked, arranging fresh flowers beside the marker. I believe they can, Alexander replied, his arm around her shoulders. And I believe they're proud of you, of your courage, your resilience, your incredible heart. Sophie leaned against him, her gaze fixed on the simple inscription they had chosen together. Thomas and Sarah Morgan, beloved parents of Sophie, forever in our hearts. Alexander, she said after a moment of silence, I've been thinking about something important. What's that? She turned to face him, her expression serious. I know you're not trying to replace my daddy. Nobody could do that, but... She hesitated, gathering courage. Would it be okay if I called you Dad, not all the time maybe? Just sometimes when it feels right. Alexander felt his heart expand in his chest, a surge of emotion so powerful it momentarily stole his breath. Sophie, I would be honored, beyond words. She nodded, satisfied. Good, because you feel like a dad to me. The way you protect me and take care of me and love me even when I'm sad or scared. That's what dads do, Alexander said softly, drawing her close. And that's what you do, Sophie replied with the simple wisdom of childhood. She took his hand, tugging gently. Come on, Dad. It's getting cold, and Eleanor said she's making hot chocolate with the little marshmallows. As they walked back toward the house, now truly their home, Alexander reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from tragedy to healing, from strangers to family. Outside, winter was settling in, covering the world in pristine white. But inside, where it mattered most, spring had already arrived. From the ashes of devastating loss, something beautiful had emerged, a phoenix of hope, resilience, and love that would continue to rise stronger with each passing day. Sophie skipped ahead, turning to call back to him with impatience. Alexander smiled, quickening his pace to catch up. The future stretched before them, no longer dark and uncertain, but full of possibility. Together they would face whatever came next. Together they would continue to rise.